Good morning, everybody. We want to thank you for joining Washington Alliance for Quality Recovery Residences and for joining our conversation today around considerations for LGBTQIA+ and people of color and immigrants, cultural competencies in recovery residences. Our presenters today are Amanda Darrow and Benja Cuque, and we are extremely grateful to have them. Please feel free to ask any questions that you have along the way, and we'll ensure that we get your questions addressed. We are having this recorded to have as a resource for you guys. I'm now going to hand it over to Amanda and Benja.
Thanks so much, Bree. Yeah, as Bree mentioned, my name's Amanda Darrow. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the executive director of Included United. My nonprofit creates inclusive, equitable, and accepting environments in which all people are treated equally with respect, embracing their race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sex, gender, identity, expression, sexual orientation, and/or disability through professional learning and education. I've taught in both elementary and higher education, and I'm so excited to be here today to do this training with you all. I've got a co-presenter, Benja, with me today.
Hello, my name is Benja Cuque. I'm initially from Guatemala. I spent 2 years doing volunteer work in Peru, where I developed this passion for human development and social work. So after attending to BYU and doing some work abroad, I started founding this SeTú organization. SeTú is an organization that is focuses in helping human rights, human development, social work, and fitness. Currently, I am an ambassador with Lululemon and a wellness coach as well. And I'm really excited to dive into these topics with all of you.
All right, and we do want to start with doing our self-descriptions for our visually impaired individuals. So I am a gender non-conforming masculine presenting cisgender woman who is white with a disability in my upper 30s. I have short brown hair, black framed glasses, and I'm wearing a black sweater, white dress shirt, and a black tie.
And I'm a cisgender man, Latino Hispanic. I have black long hair, and I'm wearing a black top and a white blazer.
All right. Well, today we've got some objectives for you. We're going to make sure that you leave with some cultural competence around the LGBTQIA+ community, the Black, Indigenous, people of color, and immigrants.
And going along with the mission of WACR, we're going to understand systemic barriers, risk, and environment factors for the LGBTQI+, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and immigrants on recovery journeys to create a safest place.
And we'll also learn strategies to create an anti-racist and inclusive environment in recovery residences and workplaces throughout Washington. So we'll start with the LGBTQIA+ community in Washington State. What we're going to do today is we're going to break up the LGBTQIA+ community by identities. We're going to talk about sex that's assigned at birth, our gender identity, who we know ourselves to be, gender expression, how we express ourselves, sexual orientation, our attraction, and our romantic orientation, our romance attraction. So jumping right into it, we're going to talk about sex, and this is the sex assigned at birth. Now, in basic biology classes, we're often taught about being assigned female at birth and being assigned male at birth. But what we're not typically taught is being intersex. And I often like to elevate the voices of individuals who are intersex to share what it means to them to be intersex. So I use interact, a company for and by intersex individuals. And their definition is an umbrella term for differences in sex traits or reproductive anatomy. Intersex people are born with these differences or develop them in childhood. There are many possible differences in genitalia, hormones, internal anatomy, or chromosomes compared to the usual 2 ways that human bodies develop. And as mentioned, I like to share what it's like to be intersex. So we're going to watch a quick little video here. I'm hoping our sound works. Let's
raise your hands.
Are we good? Can you hear the sound? Just a quick
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we can hear it.
You have testes. I'm Pigeon. I'm Alice. I'm Emily.
I'm Cypher.
And we are intersexy.
Intersex describes a person who doesn't fit the typical definition of male or female.
I have XY chromosomes, but typical female genitalia.
I'm a girl who has testes and XY chromosomes.
I identify as a queer, gender nonconforming intersex person.
I identify as a Black intersex man.
Intersex is not new. It's been around since the beginning of human existence. I mean, there's probably even intersex dinosaurs, if you think about it.
Transgender has to deal with your gender identity, whereas intersex has to deal with your biological characteristics.
Often intersex people get surgeries that they don't want, and transgender people have to fight for surgeries that they do want. They gave my mom the excuse that the internal testes were cancerous, that I would develop cancer.
They didn't even come up with an excuse, basically, in terms of a health-related reason. They instead just said it was about the appearance.
A lot of doctors are very uncomfortable with the idea that I have testes, and they're still trying to get them removed, but I'm perfectly healthy and there's nothing wrong with them.
They did a surgery to remove my testes and told my parents to take me home and just raise me as a girl. And I didn't find out about it myself until I was 12.
There aren't a lot of options, or medical providers don't explore other options. My mom would put me in dresses and she would be like, "Oh, aren't you so cute and you're so pretty?" And I would be like, "What is that about?" I was put on hormonal treatment, which consisted of estrogen and progesterone. I just wanted to belong. I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to be different. So even though I knew something felt amiss, I conformed. He was very condescending. He was like, "You intersex activists don't know what you're talking about."
It's difficult for intersex people to find each other because from an early age, we're told not to talk about our bodies.
I did feel like I was the only one.
My doctors always told me there is nobody else like me. And so it just perpetuates a vicious cycle of shame and stigma that we can't break out of. I would tell another intersex person that you are worthy. You are lovable.
Your body is beautiful. You're beautiful.
Intersex people don't need to be fixed. There's nothing wrong with them. I know you feel like you might not be able to get through this. I know you might have really dark thoughts, but I want you to know that meeting other intersex people and finding a community or a support group can be one of the most important aspects in your healing process. And we're out there. We're out here. We're here. And I just hope you can find us.
Okay, as you see there, it is a biological characteristic that we are referring to individuals who are intersex. And when we talk about
Raise your hand.
folks who are transgender, that's under gender identity, who we know ourselves to be. So cisgender, this is an individual whose sex assigned at birth and their gender identity correspond. For example, I was assigned female at birth and I identify as a woman. So I am a cisgender woman. An individual who's transgender is someone whose sex assigned at birth and gender identity do not correspond. So if I was assigned female at birth and I identified as a man, I would be a transgender man. It's important to know that many, but not all transgender people seek to bring their bodies into alignment. That's called transition. Again, not everyone needs to go through transition to be known as transgender. To be transgender, all you have to do is say, "I'm transgender." So medical transition is not necessary to be transgender. It's just an option that many may take during their gender journey. Gender fluid. This is an identity where we have these identities are under the transgender umbrella. So gender fluid is a dynamic mix between a boy and a girl. One day you might wake up and feel a little more like a boy. One day you might wake up and feel a little more like a girl. Might be a week, might be a month. There's no time frame. It's just fluid. It fluctuates on being a boy or a girl. We have individuals who are third gender and two-spirit. Now, this is what's present in Indigenous cultures, right? Where more than two genders are traditional. And so, for example, in our Indigenous culture, we would have two-spirit individuals who are encompassing both femininity and masculinity into their their gender roles. And those individuals refer to themselves as two-spirit. Same with third gender. And what's really important with this specific identity is that you must be part of those cultures to refer to yourself as those cultures. I, as a white person, will not come in and say I am two-spirit or third gender. I do not belong with those cultures. That's appropriation, and I'm not going to come in and say I'm two-spirit. We have agender, and this is someone who has little or no personal connection with gender. I always go A for no. You're going to hear me do that a couple times throughout the day. Gender queer, non-binary. These individuals do not stick with, they associate with gender, right? They're not agender. It's not no gender. Non-binary does not mean no gender. It means they still associate with gender, but it's outside of the binary of man and woman. So it could be somewhere in between. It could be a little more fluctuating as well, kind of like gender fluid, but it does not have the binary of boy and girl. All right. Often we talk about pronouns when we talk about gender identity. Most people think that our gender identities associate with a specific pronoun, but a pronoun is just the way we like to refer to ourselves or have others refer to us. And so, you heard at the beginning, I use she, her pronouns. Benja uses he, him pronouns. And we have individuals who use they, them pronouns in a singular context. And when someone uses they, them pronouns, it would be an example of they went to the store. I gave it to them. They did that themselves. And often people say, it's really hard for me to use they, them pronouns in a singular form, but we actually do it all the time. For example, if we walk up to a booth at a restaurant and someone's keys are right there, we don't say, someone left his keys. We don't decide who left their keys. We say someone left their keys. We're using it in a singular context. And in between this chart here, this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but we have a couple other examples. The ze and they pronouns in the middle are called neo pronouns or new pronouns. So ze went to the store. Ze, I gave it to zir. There's different ways to use pronouns, and people just tell you what their pronouns are. We respect them and we move on. It's just the way we respect each other one by one, making sure we know how everyone likes to be called. All right, going into our expression and the ways that we kind of put ourselves out into this world. I mentioned earlier, I'm gender nonconforming. What that means is that my gender expression is very masculine. I'm a masculine woman. It's not traditional in society for women to be as masculine. I wear a tie almost every day. It's very fitting to me. When we say masculine presenting, I want you to think of masculine being like suits, ties, dress shirts, things you'll find in men's department stores. When we think of feminine presenting, we're thinking of skirts, dresses, high heels, things you'll find in a women's section. What we have with androgynous is individuals who present not very distinguishably between masculine and feminine, right? You can't tell one way or another, or when you mix it up. So for example, I would be androgynous if I was wearing my dress shirt and tie and a skirt. That's a mix. That would be androgynous. You can't tell because I'm mixing the two. When someone thinks of a drag king or a drag queen, this gender expression is when you do it theatrically. So a drag king is hypermasculine. Think lumberjack, maybe someone, out there chopping wood with an axe and flannel, that's masculine. When we think of something very feminine, we're thinking, someone over the top in a big, beautiful ball gown and just really presenting themselves hyper femininely. That's a drag queen. All right. So then we move to attraction. We have these different forms of attraction. And when we think of sexual attraction, this is the desire to really want to have sexual contact with someone. You're showing sexual interest. When it's romantic, you're thinking more of like romance. Let's talk maybe, dating, wanting to go take people on dates, make them Spotify playlists, maybe bringing them C's candies or all kinds of treats, right? That's romance. Aesthetic attraction is when you're attracted to someone because of their appearance, nothing more than the actual aesthetic of that person. When we go into sensual attraction, we're thinking of You know, this isn't sexual in any way. This is, you're really attracted to just cuddling that person, hugging that person. It's a bond and attraction that you're getting through non-sexual attraction. Emotional is when you have the desire to really get to know someone's personality, not their physical characteristics, not that aesthetic attraction, but their emotional connection. This is kind of the soulmate talk that I talk about all the time. We then have intellectual attraction, and this is someone that really you want to get to know more, like the knowledge inside their head. They're extremely smart. To you, it's just like, you are so intellectually attractive. Tell me more. And when we take all of these attractions and we base them off of gender, it leads us to our sexual and romantic orientations. So when we start talking about sexual orientation, I'm going to kind of break up the words so that we can do the same thing with romantic orientation. So homosexual, I want you to take homo and think of same. This is someone who's attracted to the same sex or gender. When we talk heterosexual, hetero for opposite, we're going to see someone who's attracted to members of the opposite sex or gender. A lesbian is women who are primarily attracted to other women. Gay is most often men attracted to other men, but we kind of use it as an umbrella term. I often refer to myself as gay. We've got individuals who, like Ellen DeGeneres, when she came out on Time magazine many, many, many years ago, it said, I'm gay. It's just an umbrella term that we use. Bisexual is a person attracted to two gender identities. Now, it used to be attraction to men and women, but we've expanded on gender identity. So now we think of two for bi. And for example, if I was attracted to women and non-binary folks, that's two. It could be non-binary folks and men. It's just needs to be two for bi. Pansexual, I often go pan for all. This is a person that connects regardless to the gender identity or expression. You can fall in love with any and all people for the person that they are, not necessarily highlighting their gender identity or any other identity that they hold. It's romance and attraction for all. Queer is an umbrella term that we use for individuals who don't identify as straight or cisgender. The reason that we do that is because I could sit here and say, you know, I identify as a lesbian, I'm assigned female at birth, I'm cisgender. Like, starting to name all of those things often takes a toll. We'd rather just say I'm queer and move. It's kind of the umbrella, right? Like, you don't have to keep individualizing your identities. An individual who is asexual, A for no. Let's think of little or no sexual attraction at all. And then we have gray A. Gray A is an individual who identifies as, if we have people who are sexual and people who are asexual, let's just say it's a spectrum for right this minute. Gay A right here is in the middle. They're not all the way sexual. They're not all the way asexual. They're somewhere in the middle. And then our friends who identify as demisexual, this is someone who has to have a very strong emotional connection before having any sexual experiences or attraction with an individual. You have to have that strong emotional connection with someone. All right, moving on to that romantic orientation. I broke those words up purposely to make this a little easier. Remember, homo, romantic, homo for same. So a person who's romantically attracted to members of the same sex or gender. Heteroromantic, a person who's attracted, hetero for opposite, attracted to members of the opposite sex or gender. Bi for two. Biromantic, a person who experiences romance for two sexes or genders. Panromantic, pan for all. And aromantic, A for no, or little or no attraction. So what's important is that, you know, some individuals can have sexual orientation and attraction towards one identity and not have a romantic orientation with that identity, right? You can have this or that or all. For example, I could be, I identify as a lesbian. My attraction is to women. I'm a woman who loves women. And, but I also have, could have connections with individuals who are male. And that could be a heteroromantic, right? I could have a romantic attraction to men, but not a sexual attraction to men, right? Or vice versa. I could have a sexual attraction to men and not a romantic orientation to men. And any and all of these can kind of intertwine. So what does LGBTQIA+ stand for? L is for lesbian, G is for gay, B is for bisexual, T is for transgender, Q is for queer, questioning as an individual that's still trying to place what identity feels best for them. They're really looking to see where that identity fits best, and you have no time frame. You get to take your time figuring out where you land. I is for intersex, A is for asexual, and plus is anything not listed. All right, we're going to move on into the experiences of LGBTQ. So I come to you from Salt Lake City, Utah today, but we're going to be specifically focusing on Washington. In Salt Lake City, I do want to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Shoshone and Goshu tribes from where I'm standing. But as far as in the United States, we've got a population for the LGBTQIA plus community at 4.5%. Up in Washington, y'all have a higher population percentage than the United States. You're sitting at 5.2%. That's the 6th highest in the nation. And you know, y'all are having, your LGBTQ folks are having 28% of you are having children. That's lower than the national average at 29%. Where I'm at in Utah, we have the highest number at 40%. I always like to say, hey, we're keeping up with Utah culture. Just a little fun to share with y'all. When we look at income, though, we're seeing that in the United States, 25% are making less than $24,000. And we're happy to say that in Washington, that number's lower. Only 22% are making less than $24,000. You know, in individuals who don't identify as LGBTQ plus, that number making 24,000 or less is 15%. So we're still seeing that the LGBTQ community is making less than kind of the average of people who are not identifying as LGBTQ. So let's kind of talk about the experiences that lead to kind of our lives, what we go through and what we may go through. Now, this is kind of a trajectory that some individuals might go through. Not all individuals go through this, but we're going to kind of talk about what it means to come out. You know, if we face rejection from our family or friends, if we face homelessness, what traumas we have, the substance use and misuse, suicide ideation or intent, and inadequate health care, and the juvenile justice system, just a few risk and environmental factors that influence our lives. Starting with coming out. The main thing I want you to know here is this is not a single event. We come out multiple times a day, a year, a lifetime, all the time. I come out daily in trainings when I leave my house. It's just kind of like part of my life now. Was it that way 20 years ago? No, it was extremely hard. It was very hard to come out and feel that I would be accepted into this world. And I just found out that we're seeing kids come out in, you know, much lower rates. At age 13, I myself didn't come out till I was 18 years old. And I didn't think I was ready then, being in a very conservative state that, you know, not knowing if my family, my friends, or anyone was going to accept me. So coming out at 13, it seems like a dream to me, and I'm so happy that kids are finding space to do that. However, there's stressors that come with coming out. We face, you know, anxiety, depression, the potential of alienation. What's going to happen if our families kind of push us away? Do we belong? Is there a sense of not belonging when you're seen as the other? And, you know, exclusion from not only our family and friends, but social events, life. I just want you to know that when we come out to you or share our, you know, identities with you, that means we trust you. We trust you a lot. And we really hope that you can find space. I'm not telling you that you have to agree with anything, any of these identities, but find a space to humanize the experience and humanize the space in which you're finding out something about us that we've held to ourselves, and we find time to finally tell you. So the reaction that I often ask people to do when someone comes out to them is just say, thank you so much for sharing that information about yourself with me. I really appreciate it. And that's you saying thank you for opening up. Not any kind of I agree with who you are. I accept you for who you are, but thank you for sharing a part of me. That's a very human to human aspect. And we're looking for ways to just connect. And if we wanted to share it with you, it's because we trusted you and we felt that you needed to know this aspect of us. But what happens if we do face rejection from our family and friends? Well, we know that 40% of LGBT youth or LGBT adults have experienced rejection from family members or friends. Most often when people think of rejection with family and friends, they think it means get out of my house, we're done giving you, material support. That's not the only way to look at rejection. Rejection can be the ways that our family and friends talk about LGBTQIA plus identities. It can be the ways that we are silenced or people avoid us, the way that people control us or put us into isolation from others. Maybe we come out and our parents stop taking us to church because they don't want, church to know that they have a child who identifies as LGBTQ. That's isolation, that's control. Maybe we're fighting with our families a little bit more, our friends, having higher arguments and conflict. And, unfortunately, there is abuse and neglect that comes along with ways that we're rejected from family and friends. So I do want you to notice that there are more ways of being rejected than just removing individuals from housing or material support. But when we do get removed from housing and become homeless, the rates last year of transgender adults who experienced homelessness was 8% of all transgender adults were experiencing homelessness. What we mean by homelessness is not having a home, a constant home, right? You might still be having a place to stay. You might be couch surfing. You might be living at a friend's house, but it's not constant. That's as well as like on the street, unsheltered, couch surfing. There's many means to homelessness. So I do want us to notice that when we speak about homelessness here. But for LGBTQ youth ages 15 to 24, we're seeing the double compared to our non-LGBTQ. So looking at this graph, we see that we have 4% of white non-LGBTQ youth being unsheltered. When we jump to white LGBTQ under the green, you see it's 8%. Now, when we add on an additional identity as being Black and non-LGBTQ are at 7%. That doubles when they're LGBTQ, a little more than double, being Black and LGBTQ at 16%. So the highest rate for individuals who identify as LGBTQ and Black or multiracial have the highest rates of homelessness at 16%. We can see that anywhere between 15 and 30% of our homeless youth are LGBTQ. And what happens when we do experience homelessness? Well, we see poor mental health, increased substance use, greater victimization. And that's how we then come into trauma. Unfortunately, lesbian, gay, bisexuals experience higher victimization of child abuse and sexual and physical assault. We are 4 times more likely to experience violent assault, such as rape or just aggravated or simple assault, compared to our heterosexual cisgender individuals. And this statistic is just staggering, right? We've got LGBTQ people that are at higher risk developing PTSD. The general population being diagnosed with PTSD is 4.7%. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual are estimated at 48%, and transgender and gender diverse individuals are at 42% of having PTSD. That's a very large jump compared to the general population at 4.7. So we have trauma. We might be on the streets. We've been rejected from family and friends. We often turn to substance use and the misuse. We know that our lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth have higher use of drugs compared to our heterosexual youth. We know that when it comes to marijuana use, our sexually minority adults, that's 18 and older, are using marijuana at rates of 41.3% compared to the overall adult population at 18.7%. When we turn to opioids and heroin, that's being seen that almost double in comparison, 6.7% sexual minority adults using compared to 3.6% of the overall adult population. When we see alcohol use disorder being seen as having a disorder of using alcohol, misusing alcohol, would be at 21.8% for sexually minority adults compared to 11%. And then LGBT individuals show elevated rates of using smoking tobacco and using e-cigarettes compared to their heterosexual counterparts. So again, we're starting to use substances and misuse substances at higher rates. And then we build into, we're kind of seeing all this build, our suicide ideation or intent. Now, the blue lines on this bar graph are LGB, lesbian, gay, and bisexual. The red lines are heterosexual. So we're seeing that looking at the jumps, right, of youth that felt hopeless or sad every day for 2 weeks, 60% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth. When we talk about it for heterosexual youth, that number's 26.4%. Big jump. When we see seriously considering suicide, almost half of our lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth at 42.8% are seriously considering suicide. That's in comparison to 14.8% for heterosexual youth. When we think of the youth that made a suicide plan, an actual plan for suicide, 38%. Heterosexual youth was at 11.9%. For our lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth that attempted suicide, we see 29.4%. Our heterosexual youth were at 6.4%. Made a suicide attempt that required attention of a medical professional, needed attention, almost 10% of our youth. That's a huge number compared to 2% of the heterosexual youth. So then we go through all of these pieces. I do want to mention, going back to suicide ideation, one of the things that we don't do during after a death by suicide is we don't necessarily count, okay, this is someone who's part of the LGBTQ community. It's not like a checklist. We have to find that out through conversations with family members. And, so the numbers are not actually counted for in the ways that we wish it could. So if we're not able to have family interviews and have someone share with us that an individual is LGBTQ plus, we don't have that data. Moving into healthcare. So this is a big one, especially in our current world. There are 35.1% of transgender youth that live in states that passed bans on gender affirming care. These bans include our youth getting the hormone replacement therapy that they're searching for. Some ban mental health providers from helping youth during their gender journey. 35%, a third of our youth are living in a space where they are unable to get the health care that they need. As adults, we have less access to healthcare that we need as well. There's, as you saw in our income levels, there's not always benefits that come with lower paying jobs that might be part-time. If we're making $24,000 a year, likely we're working part-time, benefit packages don't come, we don't have healthcare. It's providing us less access for the care that we need. But also, when we look at that, healthcare, it might come with a lack of individualized care, a lack of knowledge behind the healthcare that we do need, right? About 4 years ago, I went to my primary care doctor and she said, I see you identify as a lesbian. Would you like to go to our specialty clinic and work with doctors who work with the LGBTQIA plus community? And I thought to myself, no, thank you. I appreciate the space, but I would hate to take a space for individuals that need more individualized care. Myself as a lesbian does not need the same care as an individual who's transgender. And transgender people don't need the same care as individuals who are intersex. It's a lack of that knowledge and base. But knowing that I identify as this community had my primary care doctor thinking I needed to go into the specialty clinic, and that's not the case. We want to save those spaces for individuals who need more individualized care around their identities that may be doing medical transition. I myself as a lesbian will not be doing medical transition. All right, then we jump into the juvenile justice system. And I just really wanted to touch base here on the fact that we only have 7 to 9% of youth nationwide that identify as LGBT, lesbian, gay, and bisexual. But we have 20% of our youth in juvenile justice systems. And I want to remind you that, you know, as we go through life, we come out, we have possible rejection from our families. We end up on the streets. We're using more drugs. We're going through more trauma. Chances are we're going to be going more through the criminal justice system when we have all of those other risk factors. And to kind of heighten it here, when you look, not only if our LGBTQ are heightened numbers, we see that the biggest number of those 20%, 85% are youth of color. So, you know, when you add on these intersecting identities, it's adding more risk and environmental factors. And we'll get into that with Benja in just a little bit. But let's talk about unintentional trauma and microaggressions. Now, a microaggression is like a statement or an action that might happen, and it's so unintentional. You're not trying to unintentionally harm someone when you say things like this. You are, you know, making a statement that you may not know causes this unintentional trauma. So let's talk through some of these. The first one, you don't look gay. Well, you know, the first thing that does is it dismisses our identity. It dismisses us as being part of the LGBTQ community. You know, the same thing as, I can't even tell that you are trans. That dismisses the trans experience that someone goes through. Many times, transgender individuals like to do what individuals call as passing. You want to pass as your identity of who you are. But we don't want to be reminded and dismissed of the experiences that we have gone through, because we've gone through quite a lot. A lot of us have different varying journeys that take us to being LGBTQ. And I think that when we tell someone you don't look gay, or I can't tell you're trans, that dismisses it. When we talk about which one of you is the husband, that's often said to me and my partner, and neither. We're both, you know, equally in this relationship as lesbians, as women. We're both still women. We would be wives. That's a microaggression that comes at us. Like, one of you must be the man. It's a term that you must use. It again kind of relays the message that our identities aren't valid, and this is the normal, and you have to fit in that normal. When we say, how did you turn gay? Well, we didn't turn gay, and that's telling us that you think that it's an option to be ourselves, to be who we are, to love who we are. So how did you turn gay? That's a hurtful one. And then they, them pronouns are just confusing. I hear this one almost every single day. And what that does is you're saying, you're confusing. For individuals that use they, them pronouns, you're confusing. I don't get you. And that can be really harmful and hurtful, right? We don't want to dismiss. What we want to do is treat people with the respect and dignity that they prefer. Maybe it's hard. Maybe it is hard for us to get they, them pronouns. Maybe we do make mistakes. Maybe we do misgender people. And maybe we do use the wrong pronouns. But by telling people that things are confusing, we are telling them, again, that they are confusing. So we really want to think about the ways that we frame things. And again, this is all unintentional. I'm not saying any of you are intentionally doing this to people, but that it's happening. So how can we affirm people? How can we find affirmation for people going through a gender journey? Well, in social affirmation, we're looking at names, we're looking at pronouns. So using people's preferred names, making sure that we're respecting pronouns, as I just mentioned. When someone comes out, often they change the way that they wear certain clothes. It's a journey. They've got to find what fits best, what feels best. And it's so intimidating to walk out into the world, into clothes that people may have never seen you in before. And so, if you have a friend who's trying on a different gender expression or different outfits, it's so affirming to just be like, you look great today. It feels good. We want to know that our choices are really good for us. And also, if you're a really good friend, a way that you can affirm is if it doesn't look great, you can say something like, you know what? I think I might have something else that might look better with that shirt, or let's go look for, kind of help, because there's journeys in these gender expression journeys and transitions that people love to get help. We've never had this option. And so finding ways to show people, the directions that they are, the clothes that they want, and it's a really positive affirmation. When we look at positive reactions during coming out, again, you do not have to accept any identity, but when you do come and say, thank you for sharing with me, that is an affirmation that truly helps individuals during this transition, or during any journey. I do want to say, I can remember so many more negative coming out experiences than the positives. And I don't want that. I want to celebrate the people who were alongside me, thanked me, and just respected me, rather than the people that may have caused some harm during my coming out. For medical, again, this might be something that people do where they get affirmation by having hormone therapy or medical surgeries. Legal affirmations is when an individual might change their name and gender on legal documents. So these are ways that they affirm kind of themselves through the process of medical, legal, and then social. And then let's just wrap this section up with some family acceptance, right? Acceptance looks different in many ways. Rather than all of those terms, those things that happen during rejection, abuse, isolation, all of those things, that's a route. This is another route. We can have accepting behaviors rather than isolation, bringing your child around, right? Making sure that you are still saying things, or child or friend, making sure they're still invited places. Take away the isolation, do these accepting behaviors, right? There's so many more. And when we do, we find that these youth are 8 times less likely to have attempted suicide, 6 times less likely to report high levels of depression, 3 times less likely to use illegal drugs, and 3 times less likely to be at high risk for sexually transmitted diseases. So we're seeing that accepting behaviors, rather than those behaviors that might lead us to those other levels, right, really do make an impact on the community. And I can say, not just for our youth, I can say that I truly do feel like a whole different human when someone treats me with a level of respect and care in comparison to harm and hate and disgust. And it's just really meaningful when people do respect me as a human being and our community. So before I jump over to Benja's section, I have to say I can't see the comment section on this webinar. So I'm going to just check in. Bree, do we have any comments, questions I could return to before we move on?
Let me double check. I'm not seeing anybody. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get those answered for you.
Perfect. And we can always follow up at the end as well. So we'll just pass it on to Benja here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda. And yeah, if there's any questions or just comments, Brianna, you can just let me know and I'll direct those. Well, thank you so much again, Amanda. We're gonna dive now into talking about creating a culture of empowerment. It's understanding and have the ability to recognize and embrace the value and the personal identity of people. So we just learned about how we can express our personal identity, and now we're also gonna dive into how can we embrace and value the personal identity of Black people of color and immigrants, especially in Washington State. So, let's see if, it's not going, in 1 second. Yes, there we go. Okay, I need to do that click here. So for that, we want to understand, and we're gonna see each of these terms later on the slides specifically, but we're gonna go for race, ethnicity, nationality, and culture. Race, it would just tell us more about like our physical traits. Ethnicity is a little more related with our cultural expression, with our language, heritage, religions, and customs. And nationality tells us where someone has been was born, or if they get a nationality from the legal system. And then culture, we're gonna talk definitely more about beliefs, behaviors, thoughts that people embrace growing up and stuff like that. Oh, there we go, perfect, it's working. Okay, so now I'm gonna talk a little bit how I embrace my identity and culture and nationality and race and ethnicity. So my race, I'm American Indian from Central America. I just also did my DNA test. I'm 75% Mayan, which was a surprise for me because I'm from Guatemala City. And unfortunately, I don't speak a Mayan language. However, I took Mayan language in college and made me appreciate my culture in a way that I have never appreciated my culture, even living in Guatemala. So that was really important for me in my identification. And I'm like so eager to keep developing this embracing of my culture, especially as Mayan. My ethnicity, I'm Hispanic Latino because I speak Spanish as my primary language. And I live in Latin America, in Guatemala, where I'm from, my nationality. And based on my culture here, I also put a Hispanic and Guatemalan because that's how I see my culture, you know, the things that I've seen even moving to United States. I moved around 10 years ago and I seen a huge difference of the things that I have adopted, the things that I still embrace. And there are different things, like, for example, we just had Thanksgiving and my mom was visiting, and I normally don't celebrate because I didn't celebrate that holiday growing up, but we met and we got her with my other friend and we celebrate a little bit. So we can see how the culture also involves as you move to different places and you can adopt or leave behind. Now, let's understand how United States also categorize race, and especially in the surveys, the census. So the Office of Management and Budget categorized race with 5 mainly races here: white, Black, or African American, American Indian, or Alaska Native, Asian, and Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islanders. There's another 6 category that people can also choose from here in the questionnaire. It's important to also know that race doesn't tell you anything about someone. It's just the characteristics that you see, the physical trait. So someone can look, they're from China, but they might have never been to China or even speak Chinese. So that's really important to also notice and know. And with that, we're gonna go and see how the racial and ethnic diversity by states in 2020, sorry. And something that is really interesting is that Washington is in the top 12, is placing number 8 in experiencing a robust growth of people, especially from migration. There's a lot of 59% that they're expecting in the following years to grow. So Washington, it's becoming diverse, more on migration, and you will see this even more. And we're gonna see with more statistics as well, the population. So here we have the Washington state population by race. We see that the biggest group is the white people with 61%, Black people with 12.6%, and American Indian Native with 1%, 0.1%, Asian 6%, Native Hawaiian 0.2%, and two other 10%. Now, so we don't see here in race, we don't see here Hispanic or Latino. This is because on the census, especially the 2020 census, the way that they were categorizing ethnicity were including Latino. So the first question in the census would be if you're Hispanic or Latino, and then they believe that Hispanic or Latino can be any race, and that's why it's not there. But we also, in Washington, the population Hispanics or Latino is 18.7%. So it's the second race and ethnicity group in Washington. Okay, let's go in there. Let's do the click now. Let's see. There we go. Perfect. Now, talking about nationality, nationality relates to the place that you were born. Okay, so in Washington, our highest nationality by population is Mexican, then we have Chinese and Indian. The important thing about nationality is that it can also be given, okay? So you can get a citizenship through the country that you lived. And so that's the two difference between a nationality and a citizenship. Nationality is irreversible, obtained by birth and based on ethnicity. Citizenship is reversible, it's gained by marriage, and it's also given based by juristic, okay? So that's like the difference between nationality and citizenship. Now, as in United States, I'm from Guatemala, that's my nationality, but I'm working toward my citizenship to be American as well. The important thing now also of a human identity is the culture. This plays a huge role in someone's identity. It's the learned behaviors, the thoughts, the beliefs, the values, the customs. In Washington, we see that also this plays in every state, it also plays a huge role because we have the languages. For example, in Washington, 20% of households speak other language in primarily rather than English. So Spanish is the number one. Then we have Chinese in Mandarin and Cantonese. And then we have Vietnamese. The important thing also about the culture is embracing the native people and the native lands that they were before. So in Washington is the 7th largest Native American population in the United States. It has 29 federal recognized tribes. Why is this important? It's because it really helps, embracing these cultures really help to keep the legacy, the heritage from these people. It also influences and preserves the art, it preserves the beliefs, it preserves the land from the people who were there before history and then have done an effort to maintain and keep that. Another important part of the culture of a state, of a person, is their beliefs. And here we're talking about religion. So we see that in Washington, the biggest group of religion people is Christianity is with the 61%, and there is no religion is the second one at 32%, and other religions like Hinduism and Buddhism is just the 1%. Now, we're going to talk about here, as Amanda also explained us about some terminology and how to use the language. There is also a way to include people in the way that we talk and the way that they see in documents and surveys is the way that we write their names, right? And their identification. So languages support integration. It's really important because we want people to see themselves in the language that we use. And we are going to discuss here a little bit of how people have, based on surveys, how people have identified with these terms. So for example, we have Black and African American. We have seen in researches that people identify more as Black. When you refer to someone as African American, you're also referring that they are or they know their legacy or ancestry from an African country. And a lot of people in United States don't know that fact. So that's why they feel more, when you use the term Black, they feel more identified with this term than African American. So if you don't know, you can use Black and then also question or use African America. Then also we have the BIPOC term, which includes Black people, Indigenous, Native American, and people of color. We also have the Asian race and Latino, Latina, or Latins, Hispanics. So this is really interesting because we have seen that language is fluid. It will continue evolving. So we have to develop the urge to always educate ourselves in the way that we are using terms, because this is something new that I never saw before growing up, but now I'm seeing this as we evolved in society is the Latinx. So Latins, using the X is starting to bring more inclusive, because when you use O or A, it just says masculine or feminine. But when people don't see with that gender, they just want to feel more inclusive, then we use the X, so Latins. And that's something that we're using in the terms. So I think that is really, really important. And it conveys, language conveys value. Also, we can use it as a way to support or challenge the system that we see to dismantle. So it's really important to have this knowledge of how we use in these terms. Now we have this question here. And this is a question that comes with a quote that I really, really enjoy. I feel like we've been talking about how we identify, right? We can identify, and if we see it in dimensions of circles, we have the race, the big circle, then we have ethnicity, and then we have a little bit more like when people feel more with the culture and nation, nationality, and all that. So we see the dimensions. So this is how you identify. The question here that we're going to start now diving in the next part of this presentation is the oppression of this identity, the discrimination, the using of power against this identity is racism. And we're going to dive into this heavy topic about racism and how we're going to see it in our society, in the institutions, in the system. So the question he's asked, the wrong first question is, what do we need to do? The right first question is, who do we need to become? And I like this quote because it invites us to have a personal transformation, invite us to see ourselves first and then act, then find something to do. And with that in mind, I want to invite you to listen to the facts that I'm going to introduce with an open mind, with an open conversation, and hoping to see it differently from what you have learned or know about racism and how it plays in our system. So for that, we're going to discuss that there are 4 levels of racism. We have the internalized racism that lies between individuals, within individuals. Then we have interpersonal racism that occurs more between individuals, systemic or institutional racism that occurs between institutions and systems of power, and then structural racism, that is the racial bias that is across society. Now, we often use system racism for both, because systemic racism, it also includes a structural racism. So for brevity of time, I'm just gonna refer to both of them as systemic racism. Now let's talk about this quote and this iceberg graphic that I have here. The thing with systemic racism is that racism doesn't always manifest through conscious or intentional or explicit actions. Sometimes, in fact, frequently, it takes the shape of a systemic and a structural biases. It's ingrained deeply within our system, law, policies, practices, beliefs, and attitudes. So this quote at the end, especially the part that I love, is like, systemic racism is so embedded in systems that is often assumed to reflect the natural, inedible order of things. And that is when we can see this iceberg. Because when we talk about racism, we see like violence, right? We see like, probably can also see like people saying derogatory like terms to people, and we see like, whoa, that is racist. That's the first thing that we see as a racism. But here we also need to understand that in our system, things are racist And we just see them as a natural, inevitable things that happen through history. So you can see here in the iceberg, right? Again, they on the top of the iceberg, racist jokes, but then we go down deep in the iceberg and we have redlining, mass incarceration. We have also, we're gonna see color blindness and how health disparities, how all this has happened, that it has evolved during the time. And the sad part as well is that our system was built with race attitudes and principles. So it wasn't that it was infected through time, it was actually built. And then we're gonna dive more into this specifically in each institution. But that is also the sad part, is that in the systemic racism that we're gonna learn today, we're gonna see the historical content. We're also gonna see the discrimination practices and the contemporary issues. With this, we're gonna see the disparities, the unfair treatment, disadvantages, and imbalances that people have within these systems. We have the justice system, we have employment, housing, education, healthcare, income, and poverty. So I want you to think in this analogy, the game Monopoly that I'm sure most of us have played before, right? So let's say that we are playing this game, and for the jump start, you start first, and after a few turns, you start accumulating wealth and you keep going, and then it's finally my turn, right? Let's say that at the end of the game, you win. And I go, it's like, well, that's unfair because you started accumulating wealth, you started before me. You were like, well, but that happened time ago, that's not my fault. But there is a game that we are playing, and there is a game that we are playing now in the society here. And that's exactly what has been happening, right? We're gonna see how the oppression of racial and ethnicity in these minority groups of people, of Black people and people of color, have this unfair game. Even this jump start, or the double standard. The double standard is another way to see this analogy, as the game keeps going, the rules keep getting harder for certain participants, right? So we will also see in history how rules were changed, especially in this one. So let's talk about the legal system. So the mass incarceration. We're gonna go back in the past. In 1865, when the 13th Amendment was passed, it abolished slavery, right? However, the amendment says, except for punishment of crime. Right after that, new laws and regulations were centered on criminalizing Black people and maintaining the same group that was targeted as slaves. The same group was targeted this time with a law and regulations to bring them to incarceration. So we can see that it was just almost like a change of a new business model. And unfortunately to see this is that the laws were evolving and people were getting imprisoned and arrested for really laws that they were not even part of to being a crime. For example, let's give you an example here. People who didn't have employment or that they were homeless, that was part of a crime. There was laws that criminalized that. So people who were just in the streets, they were sent into prison. So they were just taking all these people and making laws to bring back these people in some way to labor. And that's exactly what happened. And that's exactly what we're gonna see here in the mass incarceration. The population started to grow in prison and jails. So people were involved in no violent civil cases, but they were treated as criminals, right? Protests, people who were protesting, who were fighting for rights, all of them were again taken to prison. So they were just moving from these targeted people to prison. So with that, we can see that the loss is starting to keep going until now that we can see just as a modern racism, what is the mass incarceration? And let's talk about the factors of this as well. So when this started to happen as well, then we have another big part of history, which is the war of drugs, right? This was created just with the pretext to control communities of color. They were over-policing, going on communities in color and taking people to prison. Then we can also see this in the sentence disparities. Black people definitely are more likely to receive a longer sentence than white people. In fact, in 1990, the average for a federal drug sentence was 49% higher than white people. So, and then we also see in the war drug for the using of crack cocaine or powder cocaine, crack cocaine was more related to Black people, and the sentence was longer as well there. And 80% of Black people are related with drug offenses. And despite that, 60% of the consume cocaine are white and Hispanic. So you will see the disparity here of the sentences. Then we go with facts. So let's talk with how these facts. 1 in 3 Black men will experience imprisonment. Police violence is a significant cause of death of young men. People of color is in 39% of our population, but is a 60% incarcerated people. Big disparity there, right? We're seeing it here, and it's a fact. We also see that 1 in every 1,000 people could be possibly killed by the police. And in 12 states, more than half of the population of the imprisoned is Black. So now we see the effect. So we're seeing all this, how it's correlating. And if we think, I want you to stop for a second and just think on what to be incarcerated means to an individual. Going to prison is a major life-altering event. It creates obstacles later on. Obstacles on finding job opportunities, denial of the right to vote, health, well-being. In fact, after release, Black people and people of color are 13% higher of suicide. So you see all the health and well-being, the mental illness. So they are released, but just with all these denials and obstacles to keep continuing their life. So for example, the food stamps or other public benefits. So contributing to this just contributes to the cycle of poverty. And it just continues the old forms of discrimination, oppression, and control over Black communities. So it's so unfortunate because you can see that it's just the same from the Jim Crow, from slavery, but now to a modern way. Mass incarceration can be seen just as a slavery renamed modern racism. Now let's talk about a little bit more deep into Washington state and the disproportions in prison of people of color. In Washington, every county in Washington is imprisoning people with the highest imprisonment rates in some of the less populated counties. You can see here in this graphic that Washington incarceration rates stand out internationally. We have United States also leads in incarceration people. We have the 100,000. We have United States with 664, and then Washington with 455. And below Washington, we have United Kingdom. So this is internationally, and Portugal and United Kingdom just win 129. So we see the huge disproportionate of how many people have been in prison in Washington state. And this is, again, we're gonna dive into the policy and the sentences. So here we can see in this graphic a little bit more about how people of color is overpopulated and represented in the jail system. So we can see that the disparities in Washington we have American Indian leading, Indian leading in 1,000 people, 981 are in prison. It's a mind-blowing statistic here that we see. And we see the Indian Native Americans, and then we have the second is the Black people, and then Hispanic. Then we have white, and then Asian. But now let's see it even more specific in how these graphics are showing us how people of color are overrepresented in prison. With this graphic, we can see the population with the prison rate as well here. So for example, we have the residents in Washington, white people, we have the 60%, and in prison, 55%. But if we go to minorities and people of color and Black community, for example, let's go to Native American, they have residents of 0.9%, and 5% of this is in prison. Wow. Then we have Hispanic, we have the residents is 30%, prison 17%. Black people, residents 4%, in prison 18%. So we'll see in the white people, the percentage of population here and the rate of prison here. All the races, it's different, right? We see the disparity, we see the imbalance of that. Really unfortunate, but the reality as well of the system, the justice system. Another thing that we're going to talk today, besides the justice system, is the school to prison pipeline, and how we can understand this as well. We put it in a correlated way here. We starting with number one is the students have behavioral issues. They should ideally be addressed with counseling and support. But unfortunately, it's not like that. So in the United States, in 1.7 million of students in a school, they have a police, but they don't have any counselor. 6 million students in the United States are in a school with police, but no psychologists. So you're seeing that 6 million students in a school have a police in their system, in their school, but no psychologists. So instead of addressing behaviors here with counseling support, people in school systems are using the police. And here we also gonna start seeing that, unfortunately, we can also see the discrimination and the racism, because the police are more often to be called when there's a misbehavior from a student of color, particularly men. So Black students are 2.2 times more likely to receive a court referral. And that's the issue with this, is the court referral just shown that it plays a big role in the suspension and expulsion that students have in a school. So we see in number 3, suspension and expulsion from schools, and these just correlate to high drops of education and then continuing contact with the juvenile system. So African Americans and Hispanic students are more likely to be suspended and expelled at a rate of 3.5 times greater than white students. These unfortunate events depriving children and youth of meaningful opportunities of education and employment and democracy, because this is just letting them almost to fail in the system once again, because when there's a job, they start involving in crime, the mental health is not good, and then they again face the justice system in a different way later on years. Another thing it's important to mention is the employment system in United States. So we're gonna talk about the unemployment by race in 2019. So because of discrimination, there is a lack of education and skills. So we can see in United States that the rate of unemployment is the 6.10 for African American. Out of the total of the unemployment rate in the United States is the 3.7. Then we have our second race group is the Hispanic Latino with the 4.30%. If we go more specific to Washington, the unemployment rate for Washington State is the in total, Washington comparing to United States, 430. And then we have the Hispanic or Latino is the highest rate population here in Washington. And then we have the African American with 4.20, which lead us to see that we can see unemployment will be related to also the income. We see that Hispanic is the second biggest group of racial ethnicity in Washington, but is the first one, the leading with unemployment and income, with seeing that their Asian race is almost doing the double that Hispanics are doing. And once again, Hispanic is the second highest rate population in Washington. Then we have also from Hispanic, then we have Native Americans. This fact that we need to understand about income and employment is that it's all related as well with health. If people are experiencing unemployment, they don't have opportunities, they don't have a good housing, they don't have food choices, they don't have health insurance. And all of these are bringing also not only physical effects, but also mental issues. They get a mental illness such as anxiety, depression. And we can see it's just a correlation that oppression becomes and makes these people more unfortunate because of the disadvantages that are playing in this game, that it's being unfair for them. So now talking about healthcare and how it's related with the income and employment as well. In the United States, the minority, particular Black individuals, face reduced access to medical care compared to white individuals. Black Americans are 3 times likely to die from pollution, and they're also more likely to live near unclear air and water. And that's why we can also see here that Black people have a shorter life expectancies compared to white people, with a 70 in white people and 76 in Black people. So we can see how these things are also affecting the way that people live. And we can also see it in the mental health, not only the physical health, but the mental health. And the rate of suicide in Indigenous and Native American community is versus other racial ethnicities is 3.5 higher. In fact, the Native American race group is the highest in suicide rates, which is really, again, unfortunate. Just the lack of competence in therapy training and financial incentive for these people. And later on, we're gonna see also in traumas that have seen through history against and oppression against these communities. Let's go and talk about housing, which is one of also like biggest topic that we wanted to emphasize today with all of you. So with housing, it's important to understand that an attainable housing refers to an adequate and appropriate, affordable, accessible, and available house. The more missing of this part, the more unstable housing becomes. And good housing represents also good health and good wealth. However, discriminatory laws and unfair practices have led this disparity in the Black community, for example, that we're going to refer here in a moment with this graphic. So we can start from house segregation. We go back again in history. Once again, the system has been built with unfair practices and racist laws. So we go to housing segregation. Housing segregation contributed to the disparity because people were denied to access to public goods, right? And that it's the other important word to understand. It's these people were denied and white people were given. And this did not happen by accident, but it happened through intentional public policy. So we see that also we had the redlining in history, that Black and brown community were labeled as undesirable, hazardous, And then we have discriminatory practices of denying financial services. So these people couldn't not afford because there were law and practices that would deny to this specific people who were in segregation and redlining, and also they were going through zoning and practices and displacement, such as gentrification. So we were seeing that these people were denying moving and putting against laws that they were not giving them the opportunity to afford a house, to have an accessible house, to public goods. So then we see the housing wasn't affordable, and then the housing quality also was not given because of all these factors. And then in this graphic, we can see that because of the legacy of racist housing policies, people of color have been denied with this and have been denied with the right to build wealth. One of the primary ways of build wealth in America is to own a home. And through generations, we've seen that this has been denied. In 1976, 44% of Black families own a home, in comparison with 69% of white families that own a home in 1976. Now in 2022, 45% of Black families own a home. In the white families that own a home is 75%. So we see the disparity, just 1% from 1976 to 2022, there was just 1% of people were able to own a home. This builds this huge racial wealth gap. And again, just back to the game, monopoly, unfair, because these people got the opportunity to advance, were given the help from the government, the financial help to build this. And while Black people and people of color were denied to this. In fact, a really sad fact that we can read here is that college-educated Black people are less likely to own their own homes than white people who never finish high school. And unfortunately, the relation with the racial disparities in housing is also exacerbate racial disparities in criminal justice, in food security, and health, and many other ways that we've seen in the system. So now we've seen how a structural and systemic racism has influence in people's identity, this oppression, these racist laws that has influence in the way for them to, for a human development. Now, we also going to talk in the beginning, we say the racisms, there are also other types of racism. We're going to start with referring to internalized racism. And internalized racism lies a little more within the individual. It's internalization, is an acceptance, a belief, the stereotypes that other people or other racial people say about minority or inferior races. So for example, a person will start believing that they are inferior comparing to white people, or people will start feeling the preference for Eurocentric features, for example, right? Wanted to have this white skin. I mean, in countries, in Latin American countries, people see white people as wealthy people, right? And there are products even that help to light your skin, you know? In Guatemala, I remember growing up as a kid, I was part of that thinking. I remember seeing white people and thinking that they were in some time better and wealthy, and that I wanted to look like them. I remember I don't even want it to get too tan, because the darker I will get it in Guatemala, I will feel like more discrimination would be against me, more oppression. So people don't even like to be their skin color. So imagine how you can start living in a system that you've seen through media in different countries, you see in movies, you represent all this, that a race is better than yours because of the way that they look. So imagine living in a way that you don't even like your own color skin. How this can affect your way that you perceive the world, the way you perceive yourself. So this internalized racism is really important to identify, because people start also underestimating their own potential, their own intelligence, the ability, the power. They're losing themselves. And that happens also in a cultural assimilation, when they stop embracing the culture again just because they see it inferior. And that's something now that I see it when I moved to United States. It's unfortunate that I also see it in the Latino culture, is that a lot of kids now that have been born in the United States, for example, don't want to speak Spanish, don't want to look Latino. And again, we almost kind of repeating this history, right? And it's so unfortunate, because language is it's also said that it's the soul of a community. It's a way to really feel who you are, to identify yourself. And wanting to take this out of your identity really takes out of the whole thing of how unique and beautiful a person is, just because of the way that we see others, and the system have portrayed it as other race to be better and superior. So now we're going to talk about how this is happening also in an interpersonal way. So this more occurs between individuals, and this is probably the most obvious way that we can see racism, because we see when individuals have beliefs and prejudice become actions toward others. So we see a little bit more in a discrimination, or more in a harassment way. So we can see it more here on, in a verbal, or like in a physical way, and a visual. For example, racial jokes. Something that is really important to understand here. Racial jokes are never a good way to break the ice, to start a kind and nice conversation with someone. It's not funny. It's not funny to talk about someone's race, especially because now that you see in history and what we've seen and what people can be feeling about themselves, it doesn't go as a joke. It's just not a way to address race. And the physical way is a little, again, more obvious, is when people get more violent just because they have these beliefs. And then we have the visual way, the one is more like graffiti, or like just like more explicit there in the way that people can see it. For example, you see in the media, when you see racism, when you see like police injustice, violence against Black people, like this is like visual ways that we see racism. The thing with racism, also interpersonal, when it's within people, is that also leads to microaggressions. And it's Amanda just explained what is a microaggression in the LGBTQ. This also can happen in a way to we address people in a racist way. So for example, let's read one of these ones here, like I don't see color, right? So when we say I don't see color, our message that we actually are giving here is that your identity is not relevant. And now if we go back to all this history and all this context that we've seen in the disparities, an identity is relevant. We've seen it in history, identity is relevant. So saying that we don't see color is just saying that we don't see how relevant someone's identity is. Or for example, the other one is there is only one race, which is that I see, and it's the human race, right? This one is also goes along with that message because it goes with the message of like your experiences are not real. What your ancestor experience are not real, and because you're different, right? And that is again full microaggression that just goes with a different. Your intention might be different, but it really goes as an aggression in a form of trauma. And that's why the other thing that is important to recognize about microaggression is that these subtle ways to express things start to build trauma or remember to trauma to people. The other one, for example, is like you're English, right? You speak English so well. And again, it's just like a microaggression because it's almost giving that message. It's giving that message to you don't speak this language, you're not from here, but you speak well. And I can tell you as someone that English is not their first language. When people tell me this, I do take it as a microaggression, right? So it's really important to really start seeing these little things that can be subtle, that we can start changing in the way that we relate to others, right? And that it's the thing is that racism is a mental health issue because it really causes traumas. it has caused traumas before to generations. And it's a direct line to mental illness. So we need to treat it seriously. We need to see these microaggressions. We need to dive introspection in ourselves and see if we have ever said things like this, right? Because we can think and we say, oh, I'm not racist. I don't have a racist belief. But even without having a racist belief, you can have a racist attitude or racist behavior, right? For example, you see someone of color, a Black person approaching to you, and you're in your car, you lock your car, or you grab your purse closely to you. These can be microaggressions that you can dive deeply into yourself and ask if you have any attitude or behavior that changes just because someone looks different to us. And that is colorblindness. That is things that we can also see as a way to change, to make a difference. So with the trauma, where we're going here is that we have direct trauma, that we've seen it as like interpersonal racism, but we also have vicarious trauma stressors. So this is more like an indirect traumatic impact. It's more like living in the system where racism is part of it. So for example, one time, the brutal police killing of Black people, we just witnessed one of the biggest and most racist elements of the US criminal legal system abroad. When we see the dive of George Floyd, right? We were seeing the video, we were seeing how he was killed. This is a traumatic stressor. You are living in a society that are seeing this as normal. And for you as experiencing this, sorry, I kind of saw a chat here, so that's why I was like, oh, thank you. So I moved this. Okay, and then from here, we also, in the Latino culture, when people immigrate here and they see the way that immigrants are treated. For example, when I moved from Guatemala 10 years ago, I was pursuing a higher education in college, and I was feeling safe. I was feeling safe to be in the United States, in Salt Lake, as different political parties have become in power and more media has been shown the support of some Americans to these political parties. I started to have this feeling, a traumatic event. I started not to feel safe in a specific state or even in my own state walking by myself. And I needed to really understand this, and I really needed to heal from this again. But these are things that people like immigrant people or people of color face when we see it in the media. Okay, let's go here. Another, there we go. So in order to change this, is the reality is that we all come from different backgrounds. We experience the world differently based on our social identity. So we can do and make a difference in this. These are anti-racist core principles that we can start adopting in our life, and we can see it also in our organization and adopt this in our organization. For example, we have education. Education is the first steps toward dismantling this racism that we have seen in our systems. Is breaking through the denial. You cannot acknowledge or change something that you deny not our choice not to see, you know? So we need to choose to educate ourselves, to hear these things, you know, to see these disparities, these imbalances, the history context that our country has been through. This is important for us to know, to educate. You can dive into the reference that we have put in this presentation, so you can even go deeper into all this education, because that's going to help you to articulate in the way that you express the racisms that we live in this country, the racism that we see in our system and institutions. And with that education, with that background, it's going to give you the courage. And that's something that we need. We all need to have the courage to speak, the courage to be anti-racist, the way that you're gonna have to sit with the discomfort and the courage, the compassion and vulnerability over comfort. So you have to sit with those feelings and have the courage to make a difference. And I think that that's really important. You can identify the white privilege that you might have, and also identify that you can be an ally, that you can make a difference, that you can treat people different and not just equal, but equitable, you know. And that's something that we're gonna also search for, and seeing people as who they are. So that's, it becomes in individuality, understanding the stereotypes that we have been taught, and we also have been seeing through history, all the stereotypes, right? For example, for the war drugs, and the media were just depicting more like Black people getting arrested, and Black people related with drugs, Black people related with crime. So we start to getting all these stereotypes that Black people are drug addicts, Black people are violent, and all these things. As individuality comes in play, is that reality that you need to start taking these stereotypes out from our history, from just the racism that our history has built in our system, and understand and seeing everyone in their own potential, with their own preferences. And this goes along with the LGBTQI plus community, right? Because when we see individuals as their own way, having their own taste, having their own preference, we feel less threatened by them. And that's why it's so important to really just see the person we have in front there with their own qualities, either positive or negative qualities, but just as a person, and know with all these other stereotypes that unfortunately we sometimes live in on our consciousness and conscious mind. With
Hey,
that,
Benja, I know, I see Holly has her hand raised. Can we, I'm gonna let her talk
Okay.
real quick. All right,
Hi.
you're unmuted.
It's actually Lashanda. Holly is another person who may
Oh,
but
okay.
she's
What is your
but
name?
no, Lashanda.
Mhm.
So no, what one of the things that I put in the chat was when people say, "Oh, you're so articulate," as if they didn't expect me to be articulate. I mean, and so it's one of my biggest pet peeves, you know, as a person of color, is that why would you say that? You know, why
Yeah,
would you say that I'm articulate? Did you expect me not to be? I have a PhD.
right. You expect me to not be educated, right? Like you expect me to be less smart than you, right? And you're saying you have a PhD. Why would you think I'm not articulate just because I'm a person of color, right? Because that's exactly as you were saying. That's a microaggression right there. Thank you so much for your example and your personal experience, and being vulnerable to share this with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other raise hand or question, or if any one of you also has experienced any of this type of microaggression, will be really helpful for all of us as well to just see it and let us know. You can raise your hand or write it on the chat. Continue with here that we were saying as a allyship here. Being an ally is really important in our system right now, and also in our society, because it is taking the struggle, someone else's struggle, as your own. And that again requires a lot of courage. It requires a lot of courage to get out of a comfort area and fight the fight that others are fighting, right? For example, going back with Amanda when she explained us about LGBTQI+, the first time I went to a Pride event in Salt Lake, I was mind blown of how much support I saw. In the parade, when people were walking with their families and they were just being allies, it really brought me to tears, because I never thought that I was gonna be in a place that was gonna be accepted by other people that were not struggling while I was struggling. but that they were there for me. There was a support there. I think we have another question here. Do we have, or that was before that we? Oh, sorry, let me just, there we go. Okay, so, and the thing here is also really important because we can bring the equality over equity. And that's why we also want to achieve. We want to achieve equity in our organization, in the way that we see and help others. So for that, it's really important to start seeing how we can make the difference, how we can see the difference in the way that we're treating. And yes, we have to treat people different because people have gone through things differently. We have to give more opportunities. We have to start thinking that there has to be there ways to give even more opportunities that people that have been oppressed by the system. And that can also come with the good intention. The good intention comes from a way of life. It's like starting a new habit, starting a new way to see this, starting to adopt new ways to stop microaggressions, to stop a stereotype, to start including and making our organizations more equitable and safe for these people, especially as you all are working with people in recovering homes. How can you see this coming even more presented in your data, in your things that you're doing, in your people that you are working with your staff and all of this? Intention really brings mindful presence and awareness of what we see and what we do. It really takes deep into ourselves and ask ourselves, why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? And trust me, we all can make mistakes that can come as an intentional way. But that is why it's important to educate ourselves, because we can now make a difference. We can see where we can work in ourselves. And this comes with love. Loving yourself as an accepting that you are also an individual who is learning, who is accepting, who is making a difference, and loving people. I love how you all work in organizations that are working on empowering human. The best way to empower human is to see them as who they are. These individuals in recovering homes have been through unfortunate events that can come, unfortunately, because of racist policies and law, because of unfair treatment. And they are looking, what you doing is so beautiful, important. You're giving someone a new opportunity to start building up their life. Home, housing is so crucial in the building of a human to have a fulfilled life. And I just want to say that I appreciate this so much. I appreciate the opportunity that I have today to give a little bit of my own organization as well, to combine the efforts to make a difference. It's important for us to support people and see them as individuals. Myself, unfortunately, I have experiences both. I have experienced physical harassment from homophobic. And I have experiences also on my own oppression to accept my own identity. With my religion background religion and my country back in Guatemala, I oppressed myself for over more than 25 years, not accepting myself. All this oppression was not letting me have a fulfilling life. Because of the support that I have now, on my own support, I have understanding my own identity and the support that I have around, I'm a new person and I'm working towards making a difference. And that's something that it's inspiring. And it's something that I value a lot of your work that you are doing. You are working toward making a difference. And I appreciate once again, that work. And with that, this last phrase that we have going back to this again is the quote that I added here is, the right question is to ask, who do we need to become? And that's what I want you to live with today. So thank you so much for letting me give you this information, and with Amanda as well. So I'm going to pass it to Amanda now.
Thank you so much, Benja. That was wonderful. We are going to do our last session here. Oh, not sure what's happening, Benja. I think you're moving the screen. Give us one quick second. Go back to play from current slide right there. There we go. Okay. We good? Okay. So we want to finalize with some strategies that you can take with you for an anti-racist and inclusive environment, especially in recovery residences and with workplaces throughout Washington. So let's start. You're all here today doing this training around LGBTQIA+, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and immigrants, along with our anti-racist and building empathy trainings. So what we want is for you to provide this for every employee in your organization. You know, often some people are invited to the training, some people are not. You think that might not be their job, that they might not need that, but we all need it. We all need these trainings. And it's really important that we ensure every employee, even our executive directors, our CEOs, every single person from the top down, everywhere, trickle this information throughout your organizations. And we want you to use those anti-racist core principles that Benja just taught. We want you to really, really work towards recognizing your unconscious bias, right? We know that we all hold spaces that our society has built into us. That's what Benja just taught us, is that we hold some biases that we may not know where they lie. We do not intentionally harm individuals and push trauma. It's happening. Our society has set it up to happen. It is happening in many of our stages. So we want to recognize it. We want to do the training. We want to use those core principles, and using that education as the first one to build those core principles. We really want to find it important to tell you to hire diversity at all levels, right? I can't tell you enough. We recognize the majority of folks in high positions in organizations usually typically identify as white males. We want to build in a lot of space to make it where we have diversity at all levels, not just, okay, well, let me do a checkbox and hire diversity at the lower paying, lower positioned jobs. We want to promote diversity, and we want to promote equitable pay, right? We don't want to start organizations and say, well, this individual is doing the same job as this individual. One, it's illegal, we don't want to do that. We want to ensure that everyone's getting paid for the same work, same type of positions, promote that equitable pay. And when we say equitable, I want you to think, like, what are we paying individuals who might be single moms and having to pay for, this is just an example, single mom of color. If it's equitable, are we ensuring that she has access to be able to afford the help, the childcare, the healthcare, the food on the tables? Maybe she does need to get paid a little bit more to make access available and equitable. Maybe she needs to, we don't want her having to work multiple jobs to pay for, circumstances or situations that we can help afford. Do we make it more affordable in our policies around benefits? Think about ways that we can ensure our benefits are equitable for individuals of all identities. We want to really dive into what our policies look like. Let's assess those company policies, remove those systemic barriers, ensure that the work that we're doing is equitable, accessible. Those barriers, we're not contributing to the systemic barriers that we've discussed today. When you dive into company policies, what do they look like, as far as even diving into, again, accessibility around maybe families with childcare, remote work. We're looking into, remote work, especially when it comes to transportation, or going into the office or company. What do these policies look like, and how can we make things more accessible, more around individuals of all identities, right? And when I talk about that, of all identities, we want to acknowledge holidays of all cultures. Let's start there. Growing up Jewish in Utah, I do not have a lot of space to have my high holidays recognized. I'm expected to work during those. I have to take paid time off, my time off. Sometimes it's not paid time off, to celebrate my holidays. So looking at ways that you can acknowledge different cultures. Maybe when you do onboarding with your new team members, you provide not only an accessibility checkpoint, like a checklist of how do I make work more accessible for you as an individual and your needs to be the best employee that you are, but could I also include, are there any specific holidays that you would like to ensure you have time off for, and then work it into their schedule. There's ways to ensure that you're making sure holidays and other special events are covered. Then when we're talking about resources, let's make sure it's in multiple languages. As Benja mentioned, Spanish being a large language that's spoken, translating resources into multiple languages, not just for our employees, but for the individuals that we serve. Is there a way that our websites are becoming accessible in multiple languages? And do we have translators for individuals coming into our housing residences? And how do we ensure that we do have translators available at all times and not have to put people on, a wait list because we don't have the translators? We want to make sure that we have the policies and the resources to ensure that we're ready for those spaces. Creating a welcoming space for employee feedback. This is something I really want to share as someone who's worked in multiple organizations where welcoming spaces were not always what we had. We weren't able to discuss conversations that were uncomfortable. And here it is. This is uncomfortable conversation sometimes because it is so personal. And we want you to be okay with the fact that someone's coming to you and saying, hey, I need this, or this happened to me, or just that space for feedback. Like, let's say you misgender someone. Let's say you use the wrong pronouns for someone. Okay. Misgendering is when you use the wrong pronouns. I get called he, him all the time. People assume because of my gender expression that I use he, him pronouns. And in that moment, after someone calls me he, him, what you're supposed to do is just correct yourself and move on, right? Oh, she, her pronouns, or she said. And welcoming feedback for me to be able to come back into your office and say, hey, I just want to remind you I use she, her pronouns. And it's a welcoming space. It's not like, oh, you did something wrong. We're building a conversation. We're building that it's okay. Maybe we use a microaggression towards someone and we want to, and we felt that microaggression, right? Or you said it and I heard it about someone else of another identity. Do we have a welcoming space that we can communicate, hey, I just want you to know that's kind of what you said, and I know you meant no harm, but we want that culture where it's not a ton of call out culture. It's come in. Let's discuss this. Let's sit down and really move forward on creating a welcoming space. It's really important that we build employee resource groups. Small nonprofit organizations typically don't have large ERGs, but let's make space for them, because it really is important for us to find these groups. As in, do we have a group that's the LGBTQ, resource group, and you're all connecting, or you're going to Pride together up in Washington, or you're doing things that come together as a resource group so that you have the community. And it can just start, if you're so small, it can start as a diversity resource group, and one that you can bring together and have these conversations, assess the company policies, bring together ways to really do this work together. So that you join forces and it's not just individuals of these diverse groups doing the work by ourselves. We want to bring our allies together in resource groups. So think of ways that you can build those, even in small nonprofits or small or state-funded programs or wherever it is that you work. And then commit to and do the work. This is easy. This is easier said than done, right? You're all attending our training today. You've been given, resources, materials, ideas of what to do. You've learned about the communities. And sometimes people think, okay, I'm done. I'm good. It doesn't end here. I love that you're here today, but you've got to commit to more of the work. You've got to actually do some of these actionable items. It's great that you're all here with us today. Seriously, thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much for spending 2 hours with us on so much content, but the work starts right here, and you're about to go off and get to create all these ways that you do it yourself. So continuing with the education, we have 3 slides of resources for you all to check through. If you want to check our references, go through, learn more. Tons of references here at the end we'll share with you, but it's your job now to continue on the work. We've built the bottom of this sandcastle we've built. Now you have to help build out the framework and help us remove all this systemic barriers for the communities. So before we move on, let's just make sure, and will this be on the website? I don't want to answer for you, Bree, but I'm going to guess yes. Okay, yes, it's on the website. See that? Thank you. Okay, had to scroll down to get that you had answered that. The recording will be available, and we'd love for y'all to contact us if you have any questions. We're going to hold on here for any lasting questions, anything you'd like to share with us. And then Bree's going to just put in a post survey. We would love for you to click on that link and answer the post survey for us. And like I mentioned, 3 pages of references. Don't get overwhelmed. We want to make sure you have everything and anything that you might need today. And I want to thank you all for attending with us. I want to thank my co-presenter, Benja, for joining me today, and Jason and Bree for putting this together. We know that you all want to do this work, and we're in it with you. So thank you. Like I said, we'll just hang on here if you have any lasting questions, and then anything else we can do while we finish up these last few minutes.
There is.
Holly says, can you unmute me?
Yes. Give me 1 second. There you go.
Yeah, thanks so much for this training. This is just such good work, and thank you for sharing with us the tools in order to be able to educate ourselves and grow our community through understanding. One of the questions that, or I don't know if it's a question or it's a statement. One thing that I struggle with, and what I try to talk to my staff about, is how to be empathetic without being intrusive, and that's like a struggle. Like, you can you can help somebody and be empathetic with them, but just really trying to find out more tools on how to coach them on how to be empathetic without being intrusive, because we don't know what's going on with, like, I've never been a Jewish male. I don't understand, but I can empathize, but I'm not gonna try to get so, in the mix that I'm intrusive, right? And so I'm always looking for those tools. What you guys share with us today does help with that. And the other thing is that I have some transgender people on my team who we serve, and some of my team are questioning, like, I don't want to mess up. And I said, well, the first step is that you acknowledge that you need to understand how better to communicate. And the other thing is to, if you don't know which pronoun to use, just call the person by their name, you know, and I just wanted to share that.
I love that. And absolutely call someone by their name. You can always use the gender neutral term of they, them, but calling everyone by their names. I mean, what a sign of respect that you're acknowledging a human being by using their names. So I love that. And I do want to build real quick on the one thing around empathy that you shared. I want to tell you all, and this may be the case for many of you that do trainings or participate in certain spaces of sharing yourself. It is really tiring to do continued education for people, unless it's what you do for work. It still can be tiring, but to continuously have to educate people on our identities, on who we are, on our needs, on our everything. And, you know, sometimes people don't want to share that. Sometimes people don't want to share aspects about them. They would rather you go educate yourself on that piece, right? And having that empathy towards them not wanting to share. Don't always take it as like something offensive, or give empathy and space for them to say, I appreciate you asking, but I would really appreciate if you would go and read this article. And try not to take it offensively, because it does take a lot. As someone that does this daily, and is kind of trained to not always feel the emotions, but there's emotions behind it. There's trauma behind the work that we do, right? Sharing these pieces of ourselves. It's not always personal if someone does not want to share or get so into who they are. So I just want to give grace for all of us out there in this world that may need extra empathy around not sharing everything, right? There's some of us that do it for work, but the majority of the world does not want to always be the educator or be the teacher of ourselves. We would prefer to have others do the work alongside us. So give yourself empathy, give people empathy, build that empathy, and know that there is so much love and intention behind all of us trying to grow together. This is not something, it's not something that we take lightly when people do ask us questions, but don't take it offensively if people prefer not to answer them. So I want to touch on that, because not everyone does what me and Benja do. Any other questions? Comments? Anything? We've got some things in the chat. We really appreciate you all and your kind words, and thank you so much. And I do want to remind you, if you have any, you know, maybe you're laying in bed tonight and you're like, oh, I have a question, email us. We're happy to share and respond. And then, you know, if it's something that we think needs to go out to the full group, we'll have Bree help us get some mass email out if something came up that we needed to talk about. So thank you all for coming, and I believe that we can end here if you're
Yes,
ready.
thank you so much, Amanda and Benja. Really appreciate it.
Have a beautiful day.
Thank you all.